Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. As you can tell, this is going to be one of the episodes where I talk about a foreign election. Now, you may be wondering why this one? Well, I'm going to save the reason why I want to talk about this election for the end, because that is going to be an interesting topic nonetheless. And before we get into that, let's get right into the news. First, another foreign election, Portugal. Portugal was interesting because they actually followed the European trend of leftism. Much like how the pink tide is sort of like at least a third wave is like a newer wave of like leftist governments there seems to be another wave of leftism in Europe. Though this wave is similar to another wave, like in the past. Like how I think it was around the time of like the Great Depression and then right after the World War II, where there were a bunch of social democratic governments elected. Well, it seems that there's a continuing trend of that as well. The YouTube channel TLDR actually did a very decent video talking about this, where it's like leftist government elected here, social democratic government elected here, so on and so forth. And Portugal seems to be on this same route, because Portugal, currently, the center-left Socialist Party actually managed to win despite polls indicating that they wouldn't be doing so hot. And in fact, they actually did way better than expected. Like, originally it was expected that they, at very most, it was expected that they would, like, squeak by with, like, potentially, like, oh, there's, like, they got, like, a little bit of background and backup with the further left parties. But no, they actually won an outright majority. So they will actually not be needing the help of the leftists. And it turns out there's actually another thing. The further left people actually were the reasons why this election happened in the first place. You see, originally what happened was the Social Democrats were in a coalition with the further left parties, like the Communist Party and the Left Bloc, but the Socialists proposed a budget, and the two further left parties said that the budget didn't go far enough, and that instead they needed more social spending, more social reforms. So similar to another country in Europe, I forget which one, I think it's Norway or Sweden, but they basically try to mimic their strategy of doing a no confidence vote to get some concessions, and then when they get the concessions, they basically just pull back the votes and like, oh yeah, we'll basically vote for you to go back into the office. It's basically just like a warning shot, like, oh, if you screw up again, this time we might not put you back into the office. And basically the Left Bloc and the Communist Party were planning to do the same thing, essentially, like, oh, now we can get some concessions out of you. But the Social Democrats decided to gamble. They were basically like both of them played a gamble. Like, the Left Bloc knew that this could very much blow up in their face. And so did the Social Democrats. When they decided to hold firm, they said, no, we need to do it in this exact way. And then they blamed, like, the communists, saying, like, oh, why are you guys trying to, like, ruin social spending? Like, this is one of the biggest economic reforms that we could potentially have, and yet you have decided to oppose it for some reason. And in this election, it did not pan out for the Left Bloc or the Communists, who actually ended up losing a decent amount of seats. And a party that ended up getting some notoriety was a far-right party, which many people say, that might be a bad thing, because if they are the people that ended up rising, like, I mean, again, the Social Democrats still ended up winning by a large margin, but at the end of the day, it didn't pan out entirely. Like, it was a mixed day for the left, because like at least a Sunflower Socialist was like at least friendly to the Left Bloc. So it's not like we like beat like some tankies or something, or like the Social Democrats were like basically at the end of the day, it was a mixed bag both sides. I understand the Social Democrats saying, like, maybe they legitimately thought this was the best they could do, and I understand the Left Bloc demanding, like, some more. I mean, I don't know the specifics, but I mean, let's say maybe they gambled all this for, like, a NATO expulsion or something. I would probably be like, that's a big thing to gamble on, and it didn't pan out. But I'm pretty sure they wanted something like more social spending to their healthcare system. So basically, it was a mixed day for the left of the country of Portugal. Another country whose left is in a little bit of a tough bind is Peru. You see, because Peru's kind of going through a lot of things right now. And nowhere is that more prevalent than looking at Pedro Castillo, the president. Pedro Castillo is going to be shaking up the cabinet again. And literally, while I was recording this, I discovered that there's actually more to the story. He's actually going to be shuffling his cabinet a little bit more than, like, first, he got his cabinet when he was first elected. And, like, that cabinet was, like, of, like, his super, like, far left, quote-unquote, party. Like, everybody was like, oh, this is going to be a big deal. Peru's got a huge far left president now. But then he reshuffled his cabinet to basically moderate his stances, adopt more center-left cabinet position members. And then he was going to change his cabinet again. But then there came domestic abuse allegations, which has pegged the prime minister of this cabinet that he was going to make to resign after literally 4 days on the job. So he's basically going to have to create another new cabinet. Is this just how the pink tide falls again? Is the pink tide going to fall because it's hard to pinpoint an exact cabinet? Like, this is weird. Like, and this came after, like, I think, like Popular Updates posted a picture of, like, Pedro Castillo and Jair Bolsonaro, like, standing friendly together, being like, haha, look, Bolsonaro's wearing my hat. So there's, at the very least, I think a little bit of an indication that he's probably going to go further right with his cabinet. And, I mean, I'm just saying, things aren't looking so good for Castillo. I mean, Ortega's probably still got him beat as, like, worst pink tide guy, but Castillo, like, he needs to do some things to, like, actually make up for all of these, like, shuffles. And I'm not so sure that's going to pan out. The next story is that Democratic Majority for Israel has announced its first slate of endorsements. And if you actually take a look at a lot of his endorsements, you're going to notice that there is some interesting developments. The candidates that they are endorsing seem to either have or have the potential of having very competitive primaries. Jake Achillenos in Massachusetts District 4, Randolph Bracey in Florida District 10, Chantel Brown in Ohio District 11, Sean Casten in Illinois District 6, Jane Hamilton in Texas District 30, Steve Irwin in Pennsylvania 18, John Larson in Connecticut 01, Carolyn Maloney in New York 12, Max Rose in New York 11, Kurt Schrader in Oregon 5, Haley Stevens in Michigan 11, Dina Titus in Nevada 1, Richie Torres in New York 15, David Trone in Maryland 6, and Gilbert Villegas in Illinois 3. If I'm not mistaken, the only ones that I don't think will have a competitive primary are Larson and Trone. But then again, maybe Larson might have a primary bid. I don't know. I don't think Trone has the ability. I don't know. But Torres has the potential, and so does Achillenos, because they had, like, extremely competitive original races. But a majority of the rest of them are in very contentious seats. Either they're, like, incumbents that are in very contentious seats, like Casten, Maloney, Schrader, Titus, and Stevens, or they're in very potentially big seats, like Bracey, Florida 10. That's a pretty big seat. Whoever wins the primary in that one gets to be the nominee. And Hamilton in Texas 30. And Max Rose in New York 11, Gilbert Villegas in Illinois 3. Look, these guys have, like, these ones that either have big name primary bids, or they could have big name primary bids. Let's just say there's some names that I should probably be looking at in those seats. I mean, if Democratic Majority for Israel is scared, then that means that these seats are probably big. I guess since Casten was brought up, we should mention the person who their reason why they're endorsing him, Marie Newman. Marie Newman recently voted against the, like, Iron Dome thing, but as we know, Marie Newman's been kind of having some issues of her own. So here's some updates on the bribery scandal that may be taking place. Turns out there seems to be, like, at the very least, a little bit of So here's what happened. In October 2018, Newman allegedly signed a contract with Lyman Ayman Chehade. I thought it was Lyman, but I guess I only read it in that, but whatever. Newman allegedly signed a contract with Ayman Chehade, promising him a cozy 6-figure salary on our congressional staff in exchange for his political support, according to the Office of Congressional Ethics. When Newman ultimately didn't hire Chehade after she won her 2020 election, he sued. The two reached an undisclosed settlement over the summer, but it turns out that's not the end of the story. Newman's latest FEC filings shows that she did hire Chehade as a foreign policy advisor, only instead of being paid through her congressional office, Chehade was hired through Newman's campaign. Chehade had received a total of $54,000 since the second half of 2021, mostly in salary installments of $7,500 a month, but sometimes with an additional $2,000 payments. According to FEC filings, the disbursements to Chehade began on July 1st, 2021, just 2 days after both sides reached a deal to resolve the lawsuit. The salary appears to make Chehade far and away the highest paid employee on the Congresswoman's team during the filing period, though Newman's team now claims campaign manager Ben Hardin has since surpassed Chehade's salary. Either way, Newman's campaign told the Daily Beast that Chehade, as their foreign policy advisor, was an important member of our team. As sometimes happens, Mr. Chehade and Marie had a disagreement that led to a lawsuit in 2021. The two settled the lawsuit amicably last year and agreed to move forward together in a productive manner. Democrats should view this as exactly what it is, a tactic of our right-wing playbook to manufacture a scandal. I mean, I don't know. This is sounding a little bit sussy. I guess I'm gonna have to wait to. I'm gonna have to wait to see how the investigation, what the investigation finally concludes, because things ain't looking so good for Marie. I think we may have to give up on Illinois 6, or maybe if you're gonna do what some people did for Ed Markey and say oh, we'll just support her for the time being, and then after it's done, she's out. But it's I don't know. We'll have to wait and see if this is truly manufactured or if this is a totally legitimate concern to look at. Speaking of totally legitimate concerns, here's something that's not concerning. The North Carolina Supreme Court recently decided to destroy the congressional districts that were drawn for the 2022 midterms. Basically, the districts were drawn, again, this is always how it happens. They were drawn in a way that was incredibly racist and incredibly partisan, which literally comes right after we literally just drew the districts to be more fair and have it so that it's literally a 50-50 split for Democrats and Republicans in the state. They were basically going to redraw the districts so that it would again basically be what they were during the incredibly gerrymandered later Obama years, where it was literally 3 Democrats and what's the number? We have 13 seats, but they were going to add a 14th one. So 11-3. And this is coming from a state that now currently has 5 representatives in the House that are Democrat. To all the North Carolina political scientists and people who are forced to redraw the district, say, this is the last chance to get me to vote in November. If I ain't in the district of Nida Alam, then I ain't voting. Or at the very least, give me a seat with another competitive progressive primary. But not Erica Smith. No, not her. So anyways, let's move on to the next story. Another bid that seems to be getting a bit interesting. The Pennsylvania Senate race has actually lost a candidate. Val Akrush has actually decided to suspend her bid in the Democratic primary and instead basically try to push for whoever the general election nominee is. Here's one thing that it actually is. What it actually appears to be is the field is essentially trying to narrow itself down. As I've been saying for a while, this race seems to be a Fetterman lock, at the very least primary. General election, it seems that that's still a huge possibility, but now we're seeing a lot of things. Fetterman has basically remained in double digits ahead of all of his opponents, regardless who the second highest polling Democrat is. And pollsters have basically pretty much concluded that essentially what is happening is that the other 3 candidates, now 2, are basically fighting over the anti-Fetterman vote. It's not really an ideological battle, it's just that people who just don't like Fetterman for whatever reason will back either of those two, either Connor Lamb or Malcolm Kenyatta. Lamb has very clearly tried to be the party heads are clearly favoring Lamb, but Fetterman just has so much support over the Democratic populace that there's literally just no way they can surpass him. In fact, like, the state Democratic Party tried to literally endorse Lamb, but he just doesn't have enough support to actually make that happen. Because with Lamb, it literally is incredibly partisan. Meanwhile, Fetterman has a huge big tent. He has Republicans who support him, he has lefties who support him, he has, like, everybody supports Fetterman. But again, Lamb is seen as the safe choice. Meanwhile, throughout all the polling, it's pretty much concluded that Fetterman is really the safe choice. But it seems that the other two can't, like, it seems that essentially what people are trying to figure out is they're trying to make it so that they can see if either Kenyatta or Lamb have a chance. And if neither of them have a chance, I think they're just going to drop them. Or they're probably not going to drop them. They're just going to be like, oh, we got to figure out, like, what to do next. But essentially, those two are vying for, like, the anti-Fetterman vote for different reasons. You see, Kenyatta seems to actually just... He claims to be progressive, but he's not. He's like a fat liar. He literally tweeted extremely anti-Nina Turner and anti-Bernie stuff like, oh, Bernie, you're so stupid, or Nina, you're a Russian asset, like, that kind of stuff. But he seems to be like, the progressives seem to like him just because, like, oh, he's gay and black. And many people were even trying to claim, like, oh, Kenyatta could be the spoiler for Fetterman. But it actually doesn't seem that likely because Fetterman's net is so big that if some progressives don't vote for him, it doesn't matter. He has other people who can vote for him. Kenyatta and Arkrush, and, like, they were basically the candidates of eastern Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, Fetterman and Lamb are from the western side. And so, basically, Kenyatta is said to basically try and get all of the Arkrush voters who were voting for her literally just because she was from one side of the state. Meanwhile, Lamb is expected to get Arkrush voters who are more ideologically aligned with her. But as of right now, polls just... Like, I mean, I know we can't claim victory yet, but the polls are just showing too much of a wipeout. Now, a lot of people keep pointing out, like, oh, the polls aren't always right, the polls aren't always right, the polls aren't always right. But, I mean... So, yeah, fight for him as you can, but Fetterman, it seems like he's comfortable for the time being. And the last story seems to be coming from an interesting development in the House leadership elections. You see, it appears that Pramila Jayapal is actually eyeing a leadership position and is actively trying to campaign for that leadership position. It doesn't seem that she stated what leadership position that she is eyeing for. The one that is expected is that she's expected to eye the junior Speaker of the House, which is currently held by Kathleen Clark, which is basically a person who's kind of like one of Warren's, like, failed, like, her squad. Like, remember, like, during the primary where, like, she was like, oh, I got my own squad, essentially, where she had, like, Katie Porter, Catherine Clark, the one I just said, Lori Trahan, and the other one, Deb Haaland. Like, she had those four, and like, ooh, we're like the squad, but whitewashed. Both of policy and ethnicity. But I mean, there's also the potential that she might be seeking, like, House Democratic Leader, like the thing that Steny Hoyer has, or maybe House Majority Whip, like Jim Clyburn, because both of them have they haven't indicated that they're going to retire, but they've also, like, unlike Pelosi promised that she was going to retire, but then she announced that she will continue, not only as a candidate for re-election, but also candidate for Speaker of the House. But the other two have basically not made it known whether or not they intend to seek their leadership positions again. So many people are saying, like, Jayapal seems, like, they keep saying, like, oh, Jayapal seems to actively be campaigning for a leadership position, and I'm down to see it. I'm down to see Jayapal eye for a leadership position. Though, to be honest, I didn't expect Jayapal to do it. I expected her to kind of remain as, like, progressive caucus chair, but maybe this is like a Hail Mary. I was expecting maybe, like, she would lead the charge, like, or even, like, she leads the charge of, like, a bunch of, like, members of the progressive caucus to seek leadership positions. Like, maybe, like, oh, she seeks Speaker of the House against Pelosi. Ro Khanna seeks House Majority position for Hoyer. And Clyburn is, like, they have Cori Bush run against Clyburn. Basically be like, look, guys, time for new leadership. And like I said, I'm 100% down. However they plan to do it. Like, if Jayapal is just deciding to seek, like, junior speaker, fine. That puts her in a prime position to be speaker. If she seeks Dem caucus chair and then has, like, AOC become the progressive caucus chair, I'm down. Like, I'm down to see them. I'm down to see them try. I wish they would have tried it sooner, but, you know, they're doing it now. I mean, if it works and fails, oh well, at least we tried. Now, off of that topic, let's move on to the main topic of this video, the Filipino election. Now, I'm pretty sure a majority of you didn't even know that Philippines had elections coming up, and for some reason, I decided to talk about them. The elections are going to be held on May 9th, 2022. Now, I might say, well, then why are you talking about it now? Well, the reason is, the day after this episode comes out is going to be the beginning of the official campaign cycle of this country. Like, they will officially conduct their campaigns, like debates and whatever, and basically I'm going to talk about them and, you know, give you some analysis based on stuff. Now, you might say, oh, well, if you're talking about this, then maybe something really big and really major is going to happen in this election? To which I say, kind of, but not in the way you're thinking, depending on your political views. Now, first, what's the importance of this election? Why am I talking about it at all? Its importance basically stems from one major fact. The incumbent president, Rodrigo Duterte, cannot run for re-election. Not that a majority of my audience would want him to run for re-election. While on paper he positioned himself as sort of like a left-wing populist, he governed a lot more like a third positionist Nazbol guy. He was a lot more in line with like right-wing populists, governing really socially reactionary. One of his most infamous policies that you may have heard of is the Philippine drug war that he spearheaded, which has led to a grand total of 31,945 deaths. Or a more recent thing that you may know him of is his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has led to 3.6 million people in the Philippines getting COVID and 54,214 people dying of COVID. And yet, despite this, his fans still love him and his enemies still hate him. So the country has remained kind of divided. And Duterte actually kind of hastened the divide by actually dividing his own fans. The ruling party of PDP Laban, which is the party that Duterte is the president of, if you couldn't tell, has actually directly crumbled because of not only this, but basically what Duterte planned to do for these elections. You see, originally, Duterte had actually planned to basically try to keep a stranglehold on power by running for the vice presidency with a loyal ally of his, Senator Bongo, to be the presidential nominee. And despite the essentially personality cult surrounding Duterte, his own party basically was like, yeah, we kind of can't support this. This is a bridge too far. Like, basically they were expecting it to be like other people govern based on Duterte's ideology, not Duterte actually remaining in power. So a dissident faction within his party actually split off to basically claim they control the party, while Duterte, of course, claims he controls the party, and this has led to a huge debacle, basically handicapping the PDP to the point where they just can't field a candidate. Bongo has actually just decided, you know what, screw it, I ain't running anymore. And Duterte said, you know what, I ain't running no more either. So now there is an incredibly huge power vacuum within the country that a lot of people want to get their hands on. And as such, Duterte has essentially become the issue of the campaign. Basically, everybody's going to run on like whether or not they're pro-Duterte or anti-Duterte. Or people who are in the middle have to basically decide which side they want to lean on. Now, of course, outside of the man, what people actually are voting on are the issues. What are the actual like political issues that might define the Dutertism or not? Well, one of the major ones that you might not be familiar with is federalism in the Philippines. A lot of you probably just have no clue what that means. I didn't know what that meant either. So basically, here's what it means. The The Philippines has a unitary government system where the central government basically has control of everything. Like, the state governments essentially don't exist. There are state governments, but they essentially just report to the main federal government. And when I say, and it's not like the United States is a federal system where we have, like, state governments do actually have power. They can decide things independently from the federal government, which is what many people in the Philippines want. And it was spearheaded to a degree by Duterte because it's like a right-wing-ish idea. At least it comes off right-wing to a certain level. Another thing that seems to be an issue of the campaign is China, because Duterte actually held a very close relationship with China. And as such, many people who are pro-Duterte might want to continue this trend. People who are anti-Duterte might want to oppose this trend. But there's also one added bonus. You see, there's some people who are actually cautious that China will try to exert pressure onto the Philippines to essentially elect super pro-Beijing candidates. I think the most conspiratorial level is that China will actually send people in the Philippines to run as pro-Beijing candidates. I don't know how accurate that is, but essentially that's just another thing. The last thing that has an extremely big tie due to Duterte is his COVID response. You see, his COVID response has not only led to all those people dying, but has also led to an incredibly bad economy and inequalities in food relations. Like, some people just can't get food, which probably attributes to at least a different death total when you count that with the COVID death toll. Now, there is technically one more issue of the campaign that is technically outside of Duterte, but technically Duterte was involved in this as well, so it's still kind of a Duterte issue. It's the issue of the death penalty. You see, currently the death penalty is illegal in the Philippines. However, Duterte, with the drug war, did basically float the idea of maybe bringing back the death penalty, which many people were not exactly keen on. But then a death penalty bill was introduced, and Duterte basically said, if this passes, I'll sign it. And that death penalty bill is still being floated around in the Senate, so now people are basically trying to see, like, will the death penalty actually be brought back to the Philippines? But I've detailed the issues long enough. Now we're going to get into the people who are trying to address these issues. The thing is, there are actually 10 people who have so far not been declared nuisance candidates. In the Philippines, the term nuisance candidate is essentially like people who they don't believe are serious in their efforts to, like, actually become the office that they are seeking. Now, I could go over every single one of them, but at the end of the day, I probably shouldn't. There are at least 2 that I can verifiably say are probably going to be declared nuisance candidates. I will mention these 2, even though I think they kind of toe the line between whether or not I consider them a serious candidate or not. Ernesto Abella, who is the former presidential spokesperson, who is running as an independent, and Norberto Gonzalez of the Philippine Democratic Socialist Party, who was the former Secretary of National Defense. These 2, like, basically nobody takes them seriously, so I honestly don't think I will be taking them seriously either. However, that does leave 6 candidates left. These 6 are slated to be serious candidates, as in not only does it seem likely that they will not be declared nuisance candidates, but also people are pledging their support for them, like people are saying that they'd vote for them in polls, and so on and so forth. So we're going to be going over said candidates, and as we go through them, you'll start to see why this is the particular order I've chosen. First is Coyote de Guzman. He's a trade unionist and perennial candidate running under the Party of the Laboring Masses, which is a socialist party which is made up of militant trade unions. His vice presidential candidate is a person by the name of Walden Bayo, a former representative from Akbayan. Akbayan is another socialist party that also strongly opposes Duterte. Now, he's running under the Party of the Laboring Masses now, but I'm saying that he was originally of Akbayan. Now, here's the thing. Me mentioning the vice presidential candidate should give you one small indication. Wait, Like, most people don't really mention vice presidential candidates when they talk about foreign elections or anything of the sort. Well, because America has this weird America-centric view, but also they wouldn't mention them if they weren't important. But the reason why I mentioned the vice presidential candidate is because in the Philippines, the VP actually runs opposition, like it runs in a separate election to the presidential nominee, which has led to Duterte actually losing his preferred candidate in the last election to a person who is of his opposition to be his vice president. We'll get back to them in a bit, but first, back to Guzman. Guzman is running under the slogan, "Workers' Turn," and his major platform planks for the election is raising the minimum wage, focus spending on workers' benefits, scale back Duterte's Build plan, which is a infrastructure plan that Guzman has said that is a bit wasteful in its spending, vehemently oppose the death penalty, and repeal an anti-terrorist bill that basically opens the door for every single group that dissents against the Philippine government, leftist ones in particular, to be labeled as terrorists. Now, I mentioned him first because Guzman, he kind of toes the line slightly less than the Democratic Socialist guy and the Ayaba, because, like, Guzman has been considered viable in at least polling, but Leote has been facing a lot of suppression from the Philippine media, so much that leftists are like, dude, what the F? And that he's actually being excluded from some presidential debates. So as good as he sounds, he does have the potential of maybe, much like Ayaba and the Democratic Socialist guy, to be declared nuisance candidates. The remaining 5 candidates are basically what the Philippine media has classified as the truly legitimate candidates. Much like how in the Democratic primary, it's literally like, oh, Joe, Bernie, Warren, Kamala, and Pete. That's it. These 5 are considered the legitimate people who have an actual shot at getting the Philippine presidency. First on the agenda, Panfilo Lacson. He's an incumbent senator for the Party of Democratic Reforms, also known as Reforma. Reforma is a center-right anti-communist party. The person who will be his vice presidential candidate is Tito Soto, a senator of the Nationalist People's Coalition, another center-right party. You see, Lacson is sort of in a center-right coalition of sorts. You could argue that technically all of the candidates are in a coalition, but essentially, whatever party is the one that they are listed on the ballot on is essentially the only one that's important. Lacson is running under the slogan, "Courage, Competence, and Honesty," and it seems that he is basically trying to position himself as sort of a moderate on the Duterte versus anti-Duterte issues. You see, he plans to continue the drug war and fight against corruption, which are things that Duterte basically ran on, like, oh, this is what we're going to do. He also wants to maintain that anti-terrorism bill that I mentioned previously, which Lacson wrote. So yeah, Lacson wrote the damn bill. You want to know another bill he wrote? The death penalty bill. However, he has actually stated that if he was elected president, he would actually stop the death penalty bill from becoming law. Now you might say, why did he have this change of heart? You're not going to believe me if I tell you this, but the reason why he changed his mind was because he watched a movie called The Life of David Gale, and that inspired him so much that he literally did a 180 on the death penalty, and people say the media isn't political. Another thing that he plans to do is he wants to push the Philippines to adopt a designated survivor system. For those who don't know what a designated survivor is, it's basically where the government basically picks one person to not be in important meeting places whenever they have like all of the Congress or all of the executive branch together in case there's like a massive terrorist attack and then someone has to take over the job as president. Many of you may know of this idea based on the Netflix series of the same name, Designated Survivor. And that is how Lacson was introduced to the idea, by watching the Netflix series. Yeah, Lacson has kind of gained a little bit of notoriety for being the candidate that adopts his platform based on the shows he watches, which has led to him having a little bit of a quirky idea, like, oh, he's a little bit quirky, haha. But that's essentially all I can say about Lacson. The next candidate is Manny Pacquiao. If the butchering of that name doesn't make you recognize him, let me explain. He's a senator and a famous boxer, and he's actually the leader of the anti-Duterte PDP people. He was the one that essentially killed Duterte's party. You may also recognize him based on his boxing career, based on vehemently homophobic statements that he made as a boxer. Now, Manny is stated to be the candidate of the Progressive Movement of the De-Evolution of Initiatives, which is a political party that advocates for de-evolution, a form of government that decentralizes the power and to a purely a local level and energy independence. But essentially, he's just the candidate of the anti-Duterte PDP people. His vice presidential candidate is Lito Atienza, a representative from Brujuy, a pro-life party. His slogan is Man of Destiny for God and Country. Now, based on all the stuff that I've stated, you can probably take a wild guess what his platform is. He's basically similar to Duterte in a lot of ways. Basically, Nazbol-ish, weird in a way. He wants to bring back the death penalty, oppose gay marriage, and oppose China. Pretty right-wing stuff. But then on the other side, he wants to raise the minimum wage and provide free housing to 1.9 million poor families in the Philippines. It's a very interesting development, all things considered. Interestingly, I kind of consider him sort of like, I don't know what figure I would use, but I don't want to put like random Twitter drama in this, but like, basically, he's like those certain sections of left Twitter that are basically like, we hate Jimmy Dore, we hate whatever, but then basically adopt literally every single talking point that they espouse. He's essentially that for Duterte. Vote for me if you like Duterte, but hate Duterte. Or like one of those like anti-Trump Republicans that voted for Daryl Castle. Vote for me if you like everything he says, but hate the mean words. Next candidate is Ixo Moreno. He's the mayor of Manila and a former actor. He is the candidate for the Democratic Action Party, Axion. Axion is a liberal democratic political party. His vice presidential candidate is a cardiologist and YouTuber named Dr. Willie Ong. His slogan is Philippine Speed Movement. Now, Moreno is actually literally the most moderate of the candidates that we've seen. And when I say moderate, I mean like he's literally like an actual moderate and also a moderate on the issue of Duterte. His platform basically addresses none of the major issues outside of COVID relief. His plan is to slash oil and electricity taxes in half. He wants to put up cold storage facilities to have farmers have more food available. He wants to crack down on illegal rice importations. And out of left field, he supports LGBTQ citizens, but doesn't support the right for gay people to get married. So yeah, like I say, he's basically just like the moderate on the issue. Like, if you really just don't like or hate Duterte enough to try and stop him, you'd probably vote for Moreno. Like, oh, we don't care about all this like drama and stuff. We want to focus on like issues that address us personally. And next candidate is Leni Roberto, the only female candidate in the race. She's the incumbent vice president. The one who I previously mentioned was elected despite being part of Duterte's opposition. And just because of that, you could probably guess which side of the issue of Duterteism she is on. She is the candidate of the One Sambayan Coalition, also known as the One Nation Coalition. It's basically the anti-Duterte coalition, which includes the two biggest anti-Duterte parties, Liberal and Akbayan. Her vice presidential candidate is Francis Pangilinan. He's a senator from the Liberal Party. Her slogan is Honest Government, a Better Life for All. She is running to oppose the death penalty, push for a Jobs for All program to combat unemployment, build a green infrastructure in the nation, oppose China, and again, just generally the opposite of Duterte. I could probably list like other policy platform planks that she espoused during her vice presidency, but essentially what it is she is the opposite of Duterte. The final candidate for the race is a person by the name of Bongbong Marcos. Marcos is a former senator, the 2016 vice presidential candidate running up, and the son of Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos. And Bong Bong is actually his nickname. He's actually Ferdinand Marcos Jr. He is the candidate of the Federal Party of Philippines, a center-right federalist party. Now, if those two things weren't an indication enough, the fact that he's a son of a well-known political figure in the Philippines, and the fact that he was the 2016 VP runner-up, this might clue you in on which side of the Duterte issue he is on. His vice presidential candidate is the mayor of Davao City, Sara Duterte. In case that didn't clue you in, she is Duterte's daughter, and when Duterte didn't want to run for VP, he briefly attempted to get Sara to run in his place on the Bong Go ticket. However, Bong Go decided to drop out, and Bong Bong re-entered the scene. Sara is a member of the Lakas Christian Muslim Democrats, a Christian Democratic center-right political party. Their slogan is "Together we shall rise again." And the only actual hard-hitting policy platform that Bong Bong is espousing is keeping good relations with China. And essentially, he's just Duterte candidate. He's basically running on, "You like Duterte? Me. Vote for me." Now, interestingly, due to his very controversial nature, due to the fact that he's the son of a dictator, Bong Bong has actually had many people try to kick him off the ballot and declare him a nuisance candidate. But due to the fact that he's not a nuisance candidate, and in fact is a very serious candidate for the race, he has just not been able to be kicked off the ballot as of this moment. And the reason why they can't really kick him off the ballot is the reason why I talked about these candidates in this particular order. The polling, as of this moment, Bong Bong Marcos is polling like literally super ahead. Bong Bong Marcos, like the most recent poll was done from December 11th to 12th, and he had a 49.2% like thing, and Roberto, the leading opposition candidate, had a 16.2%. He's polling not only double digits ahead, but like large double digits ahead. Sara seems to have the same issue. She's polling extremely ahead of the remaining candidates in the field. So essentially, Bong Bong and Duterte are winning. There's really no need to support anybody in this race. Like, usually at the end, I'd give like a prediction and like a support, at least for the upcoming races that we plan to do this year. But like, this race, you can honestly skip. I only talked about this race because I just thought it was interesting because Duterte is not going to be a candidate in the race. I was thinking maybe something interesting might happen. But honestly, no, nothing interesting is going to happen. Although, to be fair, I was wrong. I did say the same thing about the Honduras election. So maybe something interesting will happen. Like, I mean, Roberto and Leote are pretty cool candidates. Honestly, I would probably support either one of them. But honestly, there's really no reason to because, I mean, this is such a lead. If I were in the Philippines, I would probably vote for Leote because they're just like, it's not like Roberto has a huge chance to beat him. So, not much else I can do there. That's essentially all I have to say on this race. Sorry that it wasn't like a good news race like I probably will be doing later, but this ain't one of those leftward shifts that we're going to be seeing in 2022. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video comes out. And if there's more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.